Vishnu Krishna Bhutale Shimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasatadisha Charane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So Srila Prabhupada accomplished something miraculous within his lifetime, and particularly in the last 10 years. Devotees, maybe they spend 10 years doing bhakti and then they get initiated. But Srila Prabhupada spread the movement around the world, established so many temples where there was zero. Of course, we see within Srila Prabhupada's lifetime, preaching was difficult. Even in India, it was difficult. That's why Srila Prabhupada left India and went to America. Big response.
Srila Prabhupada அமெரிக்காவிற்கு சென்றபோது இந்த சைவத்தை மட்டும் சாப்பிடுவது யோகா இதை பற்றி எல்லாம் அவர்கள் இதற்கு முன் கேட்டதில்லை. பிறகு அவர் அமெரிக்காவிலிருந்து இந்தியாவிற்கு வந்தபோது கூட அவர் நிலத்தை கேட்டபோது அதற்கு கூட பல பேர் அதற்கு வரவேற்பு கொடுக்கவில்லை. அதனால அவர் மீண்டும் இந்தியாவிற்கு வந்தபோது மும்பையில் பிருந்தாவனத்துல மாயாப்பூர்ல கோயில் கட்டுவதற்கு பணம் வேணும்னு கேட்டபோது இந்தியாவில் இருக்கக்கூடிய செல்வந்தர்கள் கூட பணம் கொடுக்க முன் வரவில்லை. மாறாக வெளிநாட்டில் இருக்கக்கூடிய பக்தர்களையே சார்ந்து இருக்க நேர்ந்தது.
Temples abroad, that is in foreign countries, when Prabhupada disappeared, a number of temples in India was very little, maybe 5. Now we see that has reversed, and we have maybe a few hundred temples in India compared to the rest of the world. There's more wealth. The Indian temples have more wealth than the other temples around the world. So in any case, Srila Prabhupada in his lifetime accomplished something very remarkable that had not been done before. But then Prabhupada's concern was what would happen afterwards. What would happen when he disappeared? What would happen after 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years? And he did his best to take precautions. So there were, let's say, legal precautions. So Prabhupada established, for instance, in India, a legal trust or society. This would safeguard the properties and the donations. When he first went to America, then he established International Society for Krishna Consciousness, society. One, of course, was to preserve the temples and properties. And if we can do that, that's one success. But of course, Prabhupada just didn't want preservation, he wanted expansion. Prabhupada may have been satisfied with 1 temple, 2 temples, 3 temples, but even when he had those temples, he was trying to expand.
Srila Prabhupada இடத்த ஓர் ஆலயம் 2 ஆலயம் 3 ஆலயம் வந்தபோது கூட அதை இன்னும் எப்படி விரிவாக்கம் செய்ய வேண்டும் என்கிற எண்ணம் தான் கொண்டிருந்தார்.
So at least better we can expand everything. But expansion does not mean simply increase the temples, increase the properties, increase money. It means increase devotees. But then how do we measure devotees? Let's do count bodies. So we sometimes do how many devotees are in your temple. We count, you have 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, whatever. And if you have 5 devotees, 10 devotees, it's a small temple. If you have 200 devotees, then it's a huge temple. So that's some measure, but of course, we're not just looking for numbers. There's something we cannot really quantify, and that is bhakti. So we have hundreds of devotees and they have 0.1% bhakti each. It doesn't amount to too much. So therefore, yes, we want to make devotees, but we also have to cultivate them properly and see that they develop. Even that has to be carefully analyzed because we do want to measure things. It's said for any organization, you have to measure results. You also have to have systems for preserving things. You also have to have practical plans to communicate with the public. So this means our preaching. And then we make devotees, and then you have to care for the devotees. Care, of course, ultimately means we have to make sure that we can have them cultivate bhakti properly. So again, we come back to measurement. How do we measure devotees and devotee care, etc.?
அதனால
So actually, it is quite difficult in one sense.
ஒரு விதத்துல இது ரொம்ப கஷ்டம்தான்.
But then we have to take some measurements, so we do that.
அதனால ஏதோ ஒரு விதத்துல அளவீடு செய்ய வேண்டும், செய்தாக வேண்டும்.
So then we may count how many rounds to chant.
அதனால நாம்
Chant 2 rounds at this level, 5 rounds this level.
செய்த இந்த நிலை
Of course, nothing wrong with that also, because we see the person is quite dedicated if he's chanting 16 rounds. And then another measure is initiation. If you're initiation, you're one type of devotee. If you're not initiated, you're like a second-class devotee. So then the aim of the temple is to get people initiated.
அதனால வந்து
And again, nothing wrong with that because the standards are quite high. But again, then we have to look at standards versus real qualification. You can be qualified for many things by writing different exams. That doesn't guarantee you really know the subject. We have graduates in economics or in accounts or whatever. Yeah, so they have a degree, but they may be terrible accountants. Yeah. So similarly with Bhakti, we can all set some sort of standards like that. Still, it's not a foolproof method of measuring Bhakti itself.
அதனால பக்தியிலே இவ்வாறு தேர்ச்சி முறைகளை வைத்துக்கொண்டு
So, of course, we haven't solved that problem, but we should always be thinking, what is the best way in which we can measure the devotion of devotees? And the reason for that is we overemphasize the formal recognition. Sometimes that also becomes a problem. So, in other words, we have to, in expanding the movement, have to make measurements. At the same time, we have to see that it's actually devotion that we're cultivating. We see that as movements grow and expand, etc., then we put systems in place, etc. But there's also, and it's good, at the same time, there's also some dangers.
அதனால இப்ப இயக்கம் வளர்ச்சி பெறும் பட்சத்துல
So we have this problem towards centralization and decentralization. And that's a problem or a controversy even in Iskcon. Different devotees have completely different ideas on this. Some say Prabhupada wanted centralization, others say didn't want centralization. In other words, we do have areas in which there is some controversy. But in all cases, as I said, we have to preach to make devotees, and then we have to care for the devotees, which means we have to see that they can cultivate bhakti properly. And centralization, decentralization, systems or non-systems or whatever, well, they may be applicable to certain situations. Yeah. But then ultimately, the movement is held together by the devotion. The movement grows and becomes more systemized and whatever, maybe bureaucratic or whatever. Then people sometimes feel, oh, this is all very mechanical and something, the devotion has disappeared. We expand the movement.
அதனால நாம இந்த இயக்கத்தை எவ்வாறு வளர்ச்சி பாதைக்கு கொண்டு வர வேண்டும் என்பதில கவனம் கொள்ள வேண்டும்.
So one factor we have to keep in mind. And it all depends, of course, on how deep the devotee has bhakti. Because if that bhakti is there, that solves all problems. And so as we see from Lord Chaitanya Shastaka, the real devotee is one who is humbler than a blade of grass and taller than a tree and offers respect to everyone. Doesn't expect respect for himself.
தனக்காக அவன் யாரிடத்திலிருந்தும் மரியாதையை எதிர்பார்ப்பதில்லை.
So if that principle is there and devotees are like that, we should not expect any problems at all. But then we get problems because the bhakti is probably not going properly. So therefore, bhakti is also a central thing, and care for devotees means how we develop our and other people's devotion in the proper way. The last factor for expanding a movement besides preaching and taking care of the devotees and measuring things and establishing system, the fifth element is innovation. You see that Bhaktivinoda innovated by preaching and writing in English. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur innovated by making printing presses. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, had many innovations. And of course, now there's more opportunities than ever. Because the number of innovations that happen in the world happen very quickly.
ஏன்னா இப்ப
For thousands and thousands of years, the only innovation was wheel. 5,000 years, they had carts and they went on wheels pulled by horses or bullocks
அதனால 5000 ஆண்டு காலம்
and machines. So they had automated wheels, trains. Years ago, they flew in the air and had airplanes.
அதனால 100 ஆண்டு காலத்திற்கு முன்பு இருந்து
So within a few hundred years, as opposed to thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we've had so many advances.
அதனால இந்த
They can be useful.
அது நிச்சயம் வந்து
In this way, we can utilize all the modern facilities for preaching and expanding the movement.
அதனால இந்த
But of course, mechanical devices can never replace the cultivation of bhakti itself. Therefore, we have innovation in order to communicate our message to the people at large. At the same time, we do have to cultivate our own creeper of devotion,
அதே சமயம்
spiritual life, and our various techniques of teaching.
அதனால
When we do that properly, then we can expand.
வாறு
So many outsiders are surprised that Iskcon has survived for the last 50 years. Most movements, most businesses don't survive 50 years. So Iskcon has survived and it's expanded. But it is up to the present generation to see how Iskcon can continue in the future and at the same time maintain its pure devotional attitude. So that is the challenge for all devotees.
இது எல்லாம்
But if we can make the movement expand and maintain its proper devotion, this is what will please Srila Prabhupada.
அதனால இந்த
Srila Prabhupada in one of his vast puja offerings criticized, this is after Bhakti Siddhanta's disappearance, what is the use of all the fruits and flowers? So he was criticizing the fact that the members of the Gaudiya Math had given up the preaching spirit. And they were just maintaining what had been established by Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati 15, 20 years earlier. So to preach Srila Prabhupada, then we should think very carefully how to expand the movement, how to maintain Krishna consciousness in the pure way. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a commentary, Vyavasatmaka Buddhi, and Prabhupada was inspired by that. So Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur in his purport then talks about this very one-pointed, determined intelligence. So he says the devotee should take the order of Guru as his life-sustaining medicine. Some people have diabetes and they don't take their medicine and they're going to have blood sugars.
அதனால சில
Yeah. So the instruction of Guru is the medicine which keeps you alive. If you don't take it, then you die. So Prabhupada was inspired by the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he wanted him to expand the movement, so he said, you speak to the English-speaking public.
அதனால
So similarly, Srila Prabhupada desires that all the devotees in the future will continue to preach and expand the movement. And that becomes our life-sustaining medicine. Of course, if we look carefully in that explanation of Vishwanath when he talks about the order, then he finally concludes that the order is that you should become fully dedicated to the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. So the final order of Guru, through whatever orders he gives, is that we should develop our devotion for Radha and Krishna. In other words, we are fulfilling the instructions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, and respect everybody, and not respect for ourselves. That growth of those qualities should be our sign of being a devotee. So if we can expand the movement, ourselves become an ideal devotee, and make other similar devotees, this is most pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. Our best offering to Srila Prabhupada.
இதைத்தான்
Hare Krishna.
ஹரே கிருஷ்ணா